Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is DVP World. You're watching World News Tonight. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will present a victory plan for Ukraine to U.S. President Joe Biden during his visit to the United States. This and much more in just a moment, right after the headlines. Political extremes gain ground in Brandenburg as Germany's landscape shifts. France's new government takes shape, sidelining the left. Poland rolls out a bold reconstruction plan for flood-hit areas. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in the United States to present his victory plan for Ukraine to President Joe Biden. His visit coincides with the UN General Assembly high-level week in New York City, attended by numerous world leaders, including the Polish president.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy started his visit in the United States by visiting a weapons factory in Pennsylvania. The most important goals of his visit are meetings with U.S. officials and presenting a victory plan for his country. In a statement ahead of the visit, the Ukrainian leader previewed 3 elements to his plan: further weapons donations, diplomatic efforts to force Russia to agree to peace, and holding Moscow accountable for its full-scale invasion in 2022. Not much is known about the victory plan, but experts say that both sides are betting on a military victory.
I believe that Ukraine will present its military needs and its economic needs in the long term. It will show how Ukraine can efficiently use the Western weaponry to push Russia out of its territories or strike deep in Russian territory.
Zelenskyy's visit also comes as Kyiv has been pressing the West to allow it to use the Western-supplied long-range weapons to strike targets deep inside Russia for the first time in the war. Polish top officials are also in the U.S. On Monday, Polish President Andrzej Duda spoke at the opening session of the Summit for the Future at the United Nations. He emphasized the need for collective action in addressing current global challenges.
Commitment to multilateralism with the UN at its core is a cornerstone of Polish foreign policy. We are determined to defend the UN Charter and its principles.
Poland, alongside the United States, continues to be one of Ukraine's staunchest supporters. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is also on a diplomatic offensive in the United States. He is set to attend the 79th session of the UN General Assembly and take part in a number of high-level meetings. With the U.S. presidential elections in less than 2 months, there is a sense of uncertainty as to what support for Ukraine will look like after the election.
Most of the diplomatic efforts today are caused by fears of Donald Trump winning the presidential race and seizing support for Ukraine, because we know that Ukraine is not going to survive without the U.S. help.
Zelenskyy also intends to present his plan to Congress and the 2 U.S. presidential candidates, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, during his visit. Zelenskyy's visit to the U.S. coincides with efforts from the White House to prepare a new $375 million military aid package for Ukraine.
A Russian airstrike has once again targeted the city of Zaporizhia. While the Ukrainian air defense is stretched too thin to stop all such attacks, Kyiv has found a different way to stop them, by destroying the missiles before they're launched.
21 people were injured in last night's Russian strike on Zaporizhia. For many Ukrainians, such attacks have become routine.
We came from Bakhmut, and there I experienced the same thing. When we went to bed at night and woke up because of an explosion and glass was falling on us. We started doing the same thing we did here. We got up and started cleaning everything up. I pulled my son out of the bedroom. His head was struck by the glass. There was blood in the bedroom. We ran to the bathroom, but saw that everything had fallen off there, including the tiles and the mirror.
Kiev has long called for increased supply of air defense equipment, which would enable it to stop these kinds of strikes. With defenses overstretched, Ukrainians have instead resorted to targeting Russian depots, which hold the missiles. Over the last few days, Ukraine struck a number of large weapons depots deep inside Russian territory, located up to 450 kilometers from the Ukrainian-controlled territory. The sites near Toropets and Tikhorets were reportedly holding glide bombs and long-range missiles, including those provided by North Korea.
Forces the Russian military to move and be more nimble with its logistics, meaning that it cannot simply have these weapons quickly at hand. But this does interrupt the logistical supply chains for the Russian military, and that's a massive boost, both psychologically and tactically, for the Ukrainians.
Kyiv is still asking its Western backers for permission to use long-range missiles on Russian territory. Recent attacks suggest it acquired an ersatz capability for long-range precision strikes on its own.
In Brandenburg, Germany, the Social Democrats have narrowly defeated the far-right Alternative for Germany. Meanwhile, the extreme left BSW is also gaining traction, as the Greens and Liberals failed to secure seats in the state government.
There was an air of excitement among the members of the far-right AfD party as the results, which gave them second place, came in.
The SPD and the CDU are the parties of the past. Their time is over. The future is the AfD, in Eastern Germany and everywhere.
But the Brandenburg state elections were eventually won by SPD. The Social Democrats were relieved, but not triumphant, as they defeated the AfD by only 1.7 percentage points. Still, to pull off the victory, Dietmar Woidke put his position at stake and said he would resign if SPD did not win. What's more, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz refrained from making any public appearances during this campaign.
And Olaf Scholz is the most unpopular, or one of the most unpopular politicians at the moment in Germany. And this is a victory not for Olaf Scholz, but for Woidke and for the local SPDs.
The CDU, currently the party with the most support in Germany, scored well below expectations, but that's because they asked their voters to support SPD in a bid to defeat the far right. The Greens and Free Democrats, who formed the federal coalition government, suffered a crushing defeat.
Incidentally, it is also unfortunate that political programs are no longer playing a central role, but instead everyone is concerned with how they should think and vote in a complicated tactical way to keep the AfD down.
All this effort eventually mounted to AfD coming in second, despite polls giving it the lead. However, this is the third regional election in 3 weeks in which this party recorded massive gains. The Brandenburg elections also confirmed that a far-left alternative, namely the BSW, is still on the rise. Both BSW and AfD attract fringe voters who oppose the mainstream political parties in Germany.
So you see an increasing polarization in the German election campaign, and the main focal point are the right-wing populists of Alternative for Germany.
While the Brandenburg elections are just regional, they are a litmus test for Germany's ruling coalition's popularity. The Berlin government was not given a vote of no confidence, but there is a growing anti-establishment electorate in the country, especially among young voters.
The new French government held its first cabinet meeting today. The new cabinet largely consists of Republicans and Conservatives, leaving the United Left mostly sidelined.
After 3 months of political limbo after the snap elections, a new government has finally been appointed. However, the people of France don't seem satisfied.
We are very disappointed with what's happening in politics. We find it so unfair and we don't agree. People expressed their voices in the elections, and the new government is not representative of that.
That new government, appointed by the French president himself, is mostly comprised of right-wing and conservative politicians like Bruno Retailleau, the incoming Minister of Interior and key member of the Conservative Party.
The French want more order. Order in the streets, order at the borders.
Out of all the new government posts, 10 were given to Republican politicians and just 1 to an independent left-wing representative, Didier Migaud. One of the biggest challenges this new government will have to face in the foreseeable future is the mounting budget deficit, which is already double what is allowed under EU legislation. Another hot topic is foreign policy, specifically military aid to Ukraine, which under the previous government was one of the highest among European countries.
I don't think that we should expect major changes when it comes to France's position, both in the European Union and more generally on international affairs. There will be, I believe there will be a much more emphasis from Paris when it comes to Central Eastern Europe. Bratislava's speech from President Macron was just a first step, and we hope that it will continue even further, especially with people like Mr. Haddad.
With the left calling for a no-confidence vote and no single entity having a majority in parliament, the new French government will have to rely on parties like the National Rally to pass any legislation during their tenure, however long it is.
100 days have passed since Ursula von der Leyen was re-elected as president of the European Commission. With her new EU commissioner picks in place, experts said that she now has the political momentum to push her agenda forward.
While Ursula von der Leyen shook hands with Ukrainian officials, analysts in Europe started compiling the list of promises she made in July. The main ones everyone is pointing to are bolstering defense, finding common ground with farmers on climate legislation reforms, and, most importantly, fixing the struggling European industry. The first two have been the subject of much discussion since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and still no satisfactory conclusion to them has been reached. These issues will mostly be handled by the new commissioners once they're appointed.
Will be the Commissioner for Defense.
The industry and energy costs issue, however, is not easy to solve. Since the war in Ukraine broke out, energy bills for steel and plastic plants in Germany have nearly doubled. Not only that, but according to the Draghi report, the only way out of this situation is the transition to clean, domestically produced energy. The implementation of this plan, however, is still far away.
We will inevitably fail several times until we really get to the point that implementation is smooth. And so what I mean by that is I expect countries to resist the implementation. It will fuel discontent.
While the first 100 days of her tenure as president of the European Commission might not have been as impressive as intended, Ursula von der Leyen's plan for the future of the EU still holds weight, as her commissioners, handpicked by herself, will begin to work on their boss's projects shortly.
I would like to congratulate Ursula von der Leyen on her re-election.
Severe overnight rainfall has caused widespread flooding across parts of the United Kingdom, affecting thousands of households and businesses. Severe flood alerts have been issued, with areas like Bedford, northeast of London, completely submerged. Our UK correspondent, Claudia Chivinska, has more.
This was a long night of rain all across central and southern England, as parts of the country saw a month's worth of rain in just a few hours. The worst affected areas are in the counties of Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Kent. Some schools are closed today as the amount of water has taken everyone by surprise. An amber rain weather warning is now in place for much of central and southern England, and a yellow warning covers areas of Wales and England. A total of 20 warnings and 87 flood alerts have been issued so far. In London alone, the London Fire Brigade has received around 350 calls about flooding. Firefighters are helping people trapped in their cars, responding to flooding in underground stations, and assisting people with flooding in their homes. So far, one of the home counties, Bedfordshire in the East England, has been one of the hardest hit areas, with expressways turning into rivers. Locals say they haven't seen anything like this for years.
When I got up this morning, the back garden was partially flooded. Now it's completely flooded, and it must be under about 8 or 9 inches of water. It's never been this bad since we've lived here in 2013.
A number of MPs have already expressed concern about flash flooding in their constituencies. According to scientists from the World Weather Attribution Group, the amount of rainfall on the stormiest days last winter was around 20% higher due to human-caused climate change. This could repeat again this year. I'm Claudia Czerwińska from London for TVP World.
The flood situation in Poland has improved over the past few days. Cleanup work is still taking place in the most affected areas. In Lewin Brzeski, a town which was flooded last week, water still stands on a couple of streets. Our reporter, Ovidiusz Nichea, has this next report.
Lewin Brzeski is trying to dry up after the flood. When I was here last week, 90% of the city was underwater. Now most of the city is dry. Cars are normally driving by, but some places, like this neighborhood, is still flooded. Here, firefighters are pumping this water out of the streets, and people are taking away the trash from their homes and trying to return to normality.
It's going well. We are surprised that all country around remember about us. We have everything now, just lots of everything what we need. And now everything is sorted. And the most important place, it's our estate.
In the flood-affected areas, there are now 243 closed schools, preschools, and other educational facilities. The school in Lewin Brzeski is one of them. Because of the flood, there are 200 different bridges which are in need of inspection. Poland is now estimating the losses following the flood. The first estimates suggest that the number is around 1 billion euros. However, this number is relatively conservative. The final numbers will likely be much, much higher. That's because the first numbers do not include some of the worst affected cities and towns. So in the end, the number probably will be closer to billions of euros rather than billion of euros.
A report by the Supreme Audit Office reveals that more than 350,000 Polish visas may have been issued without proper verification to citizens from Asia and African countries. The report, published by Daily Gazeta Wyborcza, outlines the details of a scandal that experts believe could have contributed to the loss of power of the Law and Justice Party in Poland last year.
This is where the corruption scheme reportedly started. Polish embassies and consulates across the globe.
Polish visas could be purchased at bazaars, so since they could be bought there, it's hard to talk about any procedure for checking who is applying for such a visa.
Gazeta Wyborcza Daily has revealed what Polish state auditors have concluded: irregularities concerning hundreds of thousands of visas.
As Polish soldiers and border guards put their lives on the line protecting us from the wave of illegal migration orchestrated by Putin and Lukashenko, the Law and Justice Administration allowed in, often after receiving illegal financial gains, 366,000 people from Asia and Africa.
Between 2018 and 2022, Poland issued several times as many visas as Spain or Germany.
In fact, Poland was not their main destination. It was Western Europe. Under Law and Justice, Poland flooded the European Union with unwanted foreigners.
The gates to Poland were kept wide open in the time when the ruling party, Law and Justice, were orchestrating a very brutal anti-migrant campaign in Poland.
Auditors put the blame for the irregularities on the previous Law and Justice administration, which was in power until 2023.
This is another lifeline for the government. They think that public opinion will move its focus from the floods and take interest in something that has been discussed for months now. They're wrong.
Among those who have been charged in the probe into the visa scandal is former Deputy Foreign Minister Piotr Wawrzyk and his associate. Edgar K. was reportedly a liaison between the Deputy Minister and the people who arranged the visas in exchange for financial benefits. But the consequences may reach even higher up, namely the former foreign ministers.
They could be definitely charged. Lack of supervision is also a felony.
The Polish government is working on a new strategy aimed at controlling migration. Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has announced works on a new bill on the matter.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in the United States on a critical mission to rally support for his victory plan aimed at ending the war with Russia. During his visit, Zelenskyy will meet with key U.S. leaders, including President Joe Biden, and attend sessions at the United Nations General Assembly to advocate for increased military aid and strategic support. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the implication of this visit and the broader geopolitical landscape is Borja Nihelo, editor-in-chief of the Key Post. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening.
So Zelenskyy's visit to the United States have been described as crucial. What are the main objectives that he hopes to achieve, and how significant is this trip for Ukraine's war effort?
Look, Ukraine has no time to waste, and it cannot afford to waste until the beginning of next year, when the election results are decided and a new president is sworn in the United States. So he is there to plead and to persuade President Biden not to wait until his successor takes office, but to give the go-ahead for Ukraine to use Western arms to strike deep into Russia, where the bases are located from which the Russians attack Ukraine. So it's not to attack Russia to gain territory. It's a defensive measure to prevent Russia from its daily onslaughts, in a sense, to close the skies and to push the Russians back out of Ukraine because of the lack of proper logistical support. Obviously, he realizes that it's not so much the UN that's so important in his speech there on Wednesday, but getting through to Biden himself, giving Biden the chance to be remembered as a president that made a difference in his last weeks in office, in the standoff with Russia and leadership role for Europe and the Western world, and to meet with Harris and to meet with Trump and to get the ball rolling and not to delay any further. So it's a critical moment, if you want, for Ukraine. And he realizes that both America is preoccupied with internal issues, economic, immigration, etc., and that in Europe there's a fair amount of Ukraine fatigue. But this is a critical moment for Ukraine. Winter is coming in, and Ukraine has to sort of make that decisive breakthrough in this war of attrition, the stalemate on the front, and to get the momentum back on not only for Ukraine but for the West, as it were.
Right, like you mentioned, every day, even every hour is very crucial and very critical for Ukraine at the moment. Now, recently there's a piece published by Politico saying that since the presidential candidate have switched in the Democratic Party side, there's actually a little bit of slowdown when it comes to the aid in Ukraine, because some of the previously mentioned as kind of Trump-proofing policies have been put on hold due to the fact that Harris is doing better than Biden in the polls, and they don't feel that urgency anymore to quote-unquote Trump-proof the situation in Ukraine. Is that something that's also being observed on the ground?
To an extent. I mean, the Americans have promised by the end of this month to, again, give another tranche of important aid, financial aid going to military supplies. There is continuity in that support. But the key element here is, look, the key question, let's be frank. Is there a Biden strategy, a Washington strategy, and read into that a coherent Western strategy to win this war? Is it simply a question of holding the Russians in place where they are, not allowing them to move any further into Ukraine? Is it a question of containment, or is it a question of a strategy for victory? And victory, let's be frank about it. It's not just victory on the battlefield, setbacks for the Russians. It's victory within Russia itself. I mean, is there a Western strategy that Zelenskyy is pleading for, not just in terms of weapons, not just in terms of financial support, but the decisiveness to get Russia to implode, as it were, to achieve mindset changes within Russia, regime change, to be very frank. And there hasn't been any sign that there is a coherent policy and agreement to achieve this, rather to hold the Russians back, to hold things in place, but not to aggravate the situation, not to exacerbate, not to escalate is the key word. And I think that Zelenskyy's mission is to say, look, it's now or never. If you don't do it now, it's going to cost you even more, and it's going to cost us even more in terms of lives. So let's do it together now while we have a chance. Let's forget about the red lines that Putin every week or every second week imbibes and refers to. Let's do the job. Let's push the Russians back and let's get the Russian population to think about, is it worth it? What have we achieved? We were promised that Kyiv would be taken in 3 days. Here we are 3 years later.
Right, like you mentioned, it is very important to figure out whether the West have the strategy as well as the political will to help Ukraine achieve that victory. So when it comes to Zelensky's victory plan, do you think that there's anything concrete in there that's persuasive enough to perhaps move that needle a little bit towards Ukraine's favor?
Look, there's nothing mystical in this. People are speculating. We don't know the details, etc. It's very simple. Get the Russians out of Ukraine, get security guarantees for Ukraine in the sense of membership of the EU and NATO. That's the bottom line, territorial integrity. If you don't do that, you will have a simmering conflict, perhaps disguised as a frozen one, and the conflict with Russia will go on for years and years and years, with a vengeful Russia, which will think that it was, cheated in its ambitions to restore order as it sees fit in its backyard. So I think it's, the challenge for Zelensky is to return to the skills he had in the first year as an orator, as a PR person, as an actor, and to persuade the West in the UN, but particularly in the US, do it now. It's in your interest. It's not just about Ukraine.
Right, you mentioned something very crucial there, the simmering conflict within Russia and its population itself. Do you think that if there's any way that Ukraine can achieve victory without significant pushback, or do you think what you mentioned, like a regime change or even something nothing short of a total victory is required?
Look, I think it's naive to think that victory will come from victory on the battlefield. Yes, with Western help and long-distance weapons, Russia can be pushed back. But victory to come needs a change in the mindset and regime within Russia. The Russian population has to realize that this is a game loser, that this bravado about we Russians are special, we can do what we want, the West has to take us so seriously because we have nuclear weapons, etc. The Russian army has been shown to be much weaker than it's purported to be. The Russian population, the latest polls are showing that slowly but surely there is great dissatisfaction with the war. It's not simply the economic costs that is hitting the top, but it's the losses. It's the losses in men and in, many. You have to realize that many of these soldiers that are sent out there and paid good wages on paper, they disappear. Their bodies are never brought back because the government doesn't want to pay for the families. And this is becoming a huge problem within Russian society. Mothers are beginning to protest, as we saw during the Afghan war. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, but in this war of attrition, which it's become, if there's not a decisive move from the West to make a difference and to carry the fight into Russia without actually attacking Moscow and St. Petersburg directly, but saying, look, here's some of the treatment that you're meting out to the Ukrainians, and are you prepared to live with this for the longer term? And that is the question that they will have to face. So, as I repeat for the second or third time, it's not a question of just victory on the battlefield. It's a question of changing mindsets and this imperialistic, chauvinistic, gung-ho attitude that many Russians have been led to accept through the propaganda that they get from the state media.
Right, so like you mentioned, it's not just a battlefield that is of the essence here. There's also the whole mentality and the whole Russian government that might need to be changed in order for Ukraine to achieve actual victory. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.